School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Megan Sweet. I'm here alone today, meeting with our guest, Alysse Castro. And today in this series where we're unpacking elements of education that are not as well known to everyone, or when you think about education, those pieces that are sometimes more mysterious. We'll be speaking with Alysse Castro, who leads a branch of supporting students that often folks don't know about and don't appreciate the depth of the support and the work there. So we're going to explore the students that she serves. So welcome, Alysse.
Thanks.
And do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Sure. I'm Alysse Castro, and I currently serve as the Executive Director for Alternative Schools for San Francisco Unified School District and County Office of Education, which is right there. It's a whole branch of schools that are often unknown and very mysterious and hidden. So, directly what I do is I supervise and support now 11 different small programs that all serve students who have been unsuccessful in traditional schools. From a layperson's perspective, we sometimes call them second chance schools. I don't call them last resort schools, but I think that it's certainly the case that no one starts out in an alternative school, and it's a very exclusive club that you have to fail into joining. But it's also behind the magic curtain. There's extraordinary stuff happening there.
Yeah.
Before I was in San Francisco, I was an alternative ed principal for a number of years. And while I was there, I became really intrigued by the mystery of what would happen when my continuation students would be detained, and they would go into the black box of juvenile hall, and they would come back. And then it was clear that something had happened, and that sometimes that experience was life-changing for the better and sometimes not. And that really, wanting to look inside that black box and finding out what happened in court schools and what happened for kids in detention, really set me down the path I'm on now, where I work a lot with justice-involved youth and do a lot of work with juvenile justice reform.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I mean, I think that's actually a great place to begin, which is, so districts call them different names and they probably fall under different categories, but the general category are like alternative schools. So schools that don't fit that normal model where kids come in and they go to school during the day, although no school fits that model now, but let's just say that's the model. And, they go from their classes and then they go home, and that's kind of what everybody has in their minds. So how do kids start to, like you said, failing into, but what's the path or a typical path of a child going into an alternative school, and how do they fit in with the other structures within a school district?
So alternative schools, I'm going to take a step back, and there's because there are so many different kinds of alternative schools, and I want to clarify that what we're talking about, because alternative is a word that can mean anything. Generally, in this branch of the education universe, alternative school is a term of art that refers to schools that have their own separate sections of the education code that identify for them different rules by which they operate, sometimes different outcomes that they're supposed to achieve. But when they're are different pieces of law that creates different opportunities for different structures, different shapes, different purposes, different funding mechanisms that can have all sorts of fascinating and funky downstream effects. And so that's what I'm talking about when we talk about alternative schools, is there's a different set of tools that are designed to accomplish a slightly different set of outcomes.
Yeah.
And then in terms of how kids get to them, the largest type of alternative schools is continuation high schools. And though they're the largest and best known, and kids usually get referred to them because they are experiencing, they're credit deficient, which means that they are failing classes at the secondary level. And credit deficient and truant are two big conditions that often will flag students for a referral to alt ed. There are others like expulsion, recommendation for expulsion, serious disciplinary issues. It is totally possible for students to self-refer, or families to choose these alternative ed settings in most cases, but we rarely do. They rarely do. Though one of my favorite experiences is when I've worked with a family for a while, and typically it was not a great experience for them to get the referral to alt ed in the first place, and they may have come in kicking and screaming, but then a couple of years later I'm getting a call from mom or grandpa or somebody saying, okay, my next one's having trouble, can you take them now? Because in fact alternative schools are generally places that take really good care of their kids.
It's a good place actually to name that. I think that the alternative schools often get a bad, like they are considered like this thing that you are like, it's a bad thing. And I think it's a really misunderstood kind of school, because you're right. And I appreciate you delineating the difference, because there are alternative schools, or even continuation schools, but I think let's just say alternative schools where maybe the kids need to be on independent study all the time, or, being in school for some reason, physically in school is difficult, for any number of reasons. It could be medical, it could be something else. It could be learning style, possibly, that it's just easier to be home alone, kind of mostly doing your own thing. And then there are schools where kids are struggling to make it in a traditional school, and they find themselves needing to do credit recovery or continuation school to allow them to finish high school. So, and in that way, can kids come in and out of those schools, or once you land in alternative schools, is that generally where you go?
Most alternative schools are referred to, or by intent, they're open entry, open exit. It's supposed to be a two-way door that they can come in really at any time, because it should be determined by when the kid is needing the transition, not by when it's convenient for a school. And then open exit, because if they no longer need that support, they can transition to their next life setting, to their next school setting, which may be, we graduate kids constantly year round. That if you finish your graduation requirements on March 3rd, you graduate on March 3rd. And I love getting on the PA on March 3rd and announcing the latest graduate. But you also should be able to transition back to a comprehensive high school. The reality is that most of our students don't transition back, and that a lot of that lives in the same conversation about the stigma and the bad rap that I want to spend a little time with. When I was first a continuation principal, my very first couple of months, I came to dread my phone ringing, because it would be some parent who basically had a conversation with the counselor at one of the comprehensive high schools, or traditional schools, as we call them, because you can't be comprehensive if you kick kids out. But sorry, my bias is showing there. But we would get, I would get a call from a parent, and it would basically be some version of, they said my kid has to go to your school. And I was like, oh God, I can't get this phone call every day. This is horrifying, because I knew what a great little school it was, and I had wanted to be there. So we started working on flipping that narrative. And I would have these conversations with families about like, well, they said that they may have said that you have to go, but actually you don't. Like, this is totally voluntary. It's not required. And in fact, I've got a little bit of a wait list right now, but if you want to get on the wait list, you can come to our orientation and check out the school. And I mean, because I found if I could get them in for orientation, I had them for life, because they come in demoralized and why we have to do this. And after 90 minutes of this is how this school works, and this school has been designed for the needs of a particular type of learner. I would sometimes say, I was the principal of Island High at that time. And I would say in orientation, Island High, it's not school for dumb kids. It's school for smart kids that don't like school. Like, this is all about not wanting to play the game of school the way it is played in a traditional high school. It has nothing to do with not wanting to learn or not being able to learn. And it's just structurally different. Like, we don't do homework, where our activities are a great deal more tactile. Our terms are much shorter. So things like turn around quickly. It's very concrete. And just changing that point of entry to being like, this is an option and you can choose it because it might be a better match for you and your family. And I'm going to give you the gift, mom, dad, of you're never going to have a fight with your kid about homework again. That enables people sometimes to find the doorway in. There was a really fascinating and problematic downstream effect of that, which is that after a few years, the reputation got a little too good. And my wait list started to get filled with, what I refer to as pink-haired goth kids, with, active chooser families whose kids were not real interested in being conforming, but who were actually, they were like easier to serve. They would show up in classes and really like want to participate in discussions and be like, and they were slowly edging out the students who didn't necessarily sign up for orientation and check every box and have their applications in early, and who maybe weren't as easy or pleasant to serve in school. And so we had to adjust the way we did waitlist. But what we learned is that our stigma cuts both ways. That it actually allows, so much of what makes an alternative school work is that it takes the needs of a targeted group of students who are not well served in a particular in the comprehensive setting and creates an environment that's exclusively designed around their needs as central. But then you have to make sure that you're actually serving those kids. And those kids are often not active choosers. So you kind of need the stigma a little bit to keep the balance right.
Right.
Because the whole point of having an alternative school is that it's different and it serves kids who weren't well served in other places by doing something different for them. And it's hard to keep the focus on those kids.
I love what you're saying there. I mean, there's a couple of things you're saying there that just really are catching my attention. The first one is that reframe, or how you frame something, is so powerful and so important, and reputation can precede something. And so I just love the reframe, because I think most people, even educators, if they think about alternative schools, there's a negative connotation, like, even if it's almost reflexive. So I love the fact that you own that and turn that around in a way that's really powerful. And I think that anyone who's actually spent time in alternative school would be with you, right? Like, of course, these are wonderful learning places for kids and they're really positive and supportive, but because the reputation is that somehow you couldn't make it, or you couldn't hang in traditional or comprehensive schools, that means you need to go here. So I just love first of all, I just love that reframe of like, no, actually it's just for kids that learn differently, that need a different learning experience, that they can be successful. And in that way, it provides a flexibility and a range of options that aren't available in most comprehensive schools, high schools, or traditional elementary schools. So it's funny that you making that shift and changing that mental experience then changed for everybody how they think about your school. And then, of course, the kids that don't like to learn or don't learn in comprehensive schools or in those traditional settings are flocking to you because it shows the need for that. So I love that journey of like taking the school from something that nobody wanted to like now too many people want it. And how do I like actually reclaim a little bit of the identity to keep it more aligned to the kids that need it, because that's a really tricky balance. And I applaud you for finding a way to do that, because often schools that do get reclaimed in that way, suddenly it does edge out the students that they were actually created for in the first place. And that can create a big equity issue. And yeah, suddenly the kids that need that programming, like need it versus want it, suddenly can't have access to it. So
I was mentioning how, we problematize the term comprehensive high school, but in some ways it really is like the crux of the matter is that a comprehensive high school's job is to be all things to all people. Like it really is to be comprehensive in who it serves. And our job in alt ed is not to do that. And so, sometimes especially when I'm working with principals who are new to alternative ed, I give them like the image of an oak tree, and that all the comprehensive schools are clustered right around the big, thick center trunk. But then there are these long, scraggly California oak tree branches that go out in all directions, and that the job of an alternative school isn't to like take one step out that branch. The job of the alternative school is to walk all the way down to the very end of that branch. Mm-hmm. And because there are some kids out there that need the thing that you can only do all the way out there at the end of that branch. And that means that, 90% of kids, probably 99% of kids in a district don't need that thing.
Right.
The ones who do need it, they need it really badly. And they need that school to walk all the way out to that branch. And I mean, that's why I have 11 microscopically small schools and programs in San Francisco right now. Only 2 of them are duplicates.
Wow.
Because they do different things for different kids that couldn't get what they needed in a comprehensive setting.
Maybe can you explain what some of those schools are? Because first of all, I just love that notion of like my heart was like so warm when you were saying, serving the kids that are all the way out on the extremes, because that's our job as educators, is to find kids and meet them and bring them forward. So I love just the mission of that and the notion that that's who we're serving, and that we're going all the way out on that branch. To serve kids. So that just warms my heart. So thank you for leading in that way. Because not all leaders lead in that way and frame it that way. But maybe you can describe some of the schools that you do support. Because lots of folks, I think it's a new concept, this kind of school.
I'll do the quick rundown to give sort of breadth, and then we can pick a few to explore if you want to go there. So we have 2 continuation high schools, but they're quite different. Continuations serve kids who are at least 16 years old, and usually their leading indicators are truancy and credit deficiency. And so it's all kids who are at least on their second high school. And one of those schools operates in a really small family-like feel, with the family feel is what they're going for. Everyone knows everyone, and they drive with relationship. The other one of them is a project-based learning school, which drives with a pedagogical notion, in which it's entirely fun, that kids are in self-contained classes all day long with 2 teachers who are co-teaching all their integrated subjects, all oriented around a thematic project. And then I have a full independent study school, and independent study could be like its whole own animal. But the independent study school also does project-based interdisciplinary study, with students who usually come to campus or come to virtual class these days for a couple of hours a week. So it's almost like a collegiate model of you get little sections of support. And those are my three big schools. They sit between 150 and 200 kids. And then on the county side of the fence, because San Francisco is also a county office of ed, and county offices are designed to provide safety net schools for student populations that pretty much can't be served by a school district. So on the county side, we have a small program for pregnant and parenting teens that has, childcare on site and a full early childhood education career technical ed program. We have our county community school, which serves mostly young people who are expelled or recommended by probation. They operate in these cohorts of 3 teachers that they have a social worker, a teacher, a gen ed teacher, and a special ed teacher who work together. And one of our big goals there is the social emotional learning of all of the students. And sort of from a programmatic standpoint, a big goal there is to bring kids back from non-public school. Then 2 dropout recovery programs located inside of YMCAs that are mostly focused on 14 and 15-year-olds, because it's a little known fact that dropouts are usually made in the transition between 8th and 9th grade. That's where we lose the most kids. So there's these 2 programs that are short-term programs to try to get kids off the street and back in school. And my then a program located inside a hospital for students who are in day treatment. They're all students with severe emotional disturbance. Got another program inside the Embarcadero YMCA that is for 17, 18, and 19-year-olds who are working full-time for the most part, and kind of wrapping their educational goals around their adult lives with all personalized learning. The court school, serving kids who are actually in detention and getting them ready for reentry. And then our newest is a brand new couple-month-old program, really 1-month-old program, serving newcomer youth like 17, 18, 19-year-old recent immigrant kids who are all very limited English, mostly limited literacy and limited first limited home language literacy, and who are working full time and not able to engage in distance learning in their regular programs. That's a lot of work.
That's a lot. Yeah, that's you're naming them. Those are, I just want to come and work in all of your schools, because those are
more than welcome.
Excellent. Well, I might hit you up on that, because those are the populations that I am most drawn to and supporting, and what you're talking about are kids that really have these needs that don't fit in with a comprehensive day. But the services that you're providing are really profound. I mean, these are giving kids another chance to be able to finish school. And I love that you have a newcomer program. We interviewed someone a while back who wrote The Faraway Brothers. Have you read The Faraway Brothers or heard about The Faraway Brothers? It's about 2 brothers from Oakland who traveled here, because a lot of newcomers are unaccompanied youth, right? So they've crossed the border on their own. And so this is a story about 2 real brothers who crossed at separate times, but found themselves in the United States and in Oakland, going to school and just kind of charting their journey. And, you don't think about all the needs of a student like that. And they're really profound. And these are kids that are, often don't have any other choice. They're making on their own. The main amount of responsibilities on them at a young age are just enormous. And so to be in a new place and to be able to access programming that actually supports them to be successful here is just huge. So it just makes me so happy to hear that program is there.
Yeah. it's really exciting for me. You know, when school closed, when physical school buildings closed down in March, and you know, none of us knew what to make of this. You know, my approach to this really was that, well, if we know that most of what's actually happening in school buildings are not working for a certain set of kids, then like, what are the opportunities we suddenly get as a result of this change? And we had been working on this newcomer alternative program for a while, but the sticking point was a building. That we couldn't identify a building to work out of. And all of a sudden it was just like, oh, wait a minute. That problem just went away. Because I'd been squirreling away money to fund new teachers, to fund, like we thought we were going to get a go for this. And then the whole like decision-making process shut down without being able to assign us a building. I was like, wait, let's go anyway. We don't need a building. I can buy touchscreen Chrome pads, Chromebooks. I just smush two things together there. And I mean, that's kind of been like our whole banana pants approach to COVID is, you know, it became obvious over the summer that we were going to need some massive professional development about how to do remote learning. And it was not going to come at the pace that was needed to conduct an entire system-wide experiment in remote learning with a whole bunch of people who aren't trained to do that. So we really sat down and got stuck real early on the goal of ensuring that the alt-ed student was the unexpected winner of emergency remote learning. And there have been a lot of victories, but being able to just open a school in January in the middle of a crisis for the kids who are most impacted by the crisis, because we're just like, screw it, we don't need a building, was one of those things that feels really like the best part of alt-ed is that no one understands what you do. And for the most part, this isn't the best part, but it sets up a good condition. For the most part, the entire educational system has kind of given up on these kids. They're like, right, we don't know what to do. And if you can do anything with them, it's like, go. You just go, you do that thing. Mm. And it creates this amazing space for innovating in the margins. And the further you go out to the edge of those oak trees, out to the edge of those branches, you know, the further you are in the margins, working with young people who people are like, we didn't think anything would work. So if you've got an idea at all, it's probably better than what's happening right now. And I'm exhausted and I'm killing myself, but I am the only educator I know in public education who feels like she's doing her best work this year.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, when you were saying that, I mean, I think that's, number one, I think you have an amazing attitude and you're clearly looking for, you said earlier, open doors, and it's been a thing we've been talking about at my job around like looking for the open doors, but like looking for those openings, also reframing these challenges as opportunities, which I think that mindset is really important. And so it's exciting to hear and be around somebody who's doing that. But also, I think you're making a really powerful point around this moment in time. So schools that have not been a part of the norm, like yours and the ones that you lead, you're already acclimated to being a little bit more flexible, to trying different things out, to thinking outside the box, which I think has probably been really served you this year in a way that a lot of other schools haven't. And I wonder, I yearn for us to bring some of that flexibility that you have now into post-COVID life. Like, what would it look like for us to change how we do it? I mean, I'm ready to, break it all down. Yeah, blow it up. start all over again, like, because our traditional system actually failed a lot of kids. And you serve the kids that have maybe been failed the most profoundly or have had the most challenges with it. A lot of our kids that are kind of failed by the system limp through our traditional system and our comprehensive schools, but just don't actually have their needs met. And it's not because the educators are bad or anyone else is bad. It's just because that mold doesn't fit for everyone. And really, I'd say my kid's it's like the pink-haired girl that would want to go to the alternative high school you were leading, because he doesn't think that way. He's an independent thinker, and I've watched him suffering since kindergarten in trying to stay with a traditional model of learning, where it's just not how his mind works. And just watching that tension. And he's he's got a lot of things, going for him. He's an incredibly entitled kid. He's got a mom who's an educator who can, who knows and has enough and is empowered to get his needs met. And then I think about all the kids that don't have parents that are savvy in that way and that have kids that are suffering. And then you add a lot of the other barriers and challenges that our kids are bringing into schools and how schools aren't set up for them. And it's kind of miraculous sometimes how many kids make it through. And I have a wish when we come back that it's different, that we actually can infuse some of that flexibility of alternative school programs into everything that we do, so that it's not this thing on the side where it's just this, you're on the edge of the branches, but actually we start from the edge of the branches and go inward from there, and just reorient our focus.
There's a really interesting thing that's making me think of that, this summer when I was like, okay, no one else is going to do it. I need to suddenly become an expert in distance learning for alternative ed, and taking a crash course on the internet in what are the practices that I know to be effective in alternative ed? What are our best practices there that are meaningful and sensible in distance learning? I've taught a class in distance once, which is an enormous head start over 0 times. I learned so much from teaching my university students remotely one time. So I was that far ahead of the curve, but really looking for materials and practice and research about what works in this space. What I've been fascinated to find is that most of the best resources I'm finding, not all, but most of the best resources I'm finding come out of the really poshy private school universe.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've been doing some amazing classes from an organization called Global Online Academy. And when I first investigated them, I'm like, obviously they have plenty of money because they have plenty of money to write blog posts and seed the web with all sorts of really good readings that I keep coming back to them. But then and the classes are incredibly reasonably priced, but even I'm paying their non-member price, and I'm looking at who the member prices are. And they're all these they're like, Nohoa School, they're like the private academy elite schools. And in those contexts, they are teaching really amazing remote learning. And there's nothing stopping us from doing that in the public education sector. But there's nothing making it easy either.
Yeah.
And when I think about what stops us, all the time. I work with new continuing. Nobody gets a degree in alternative ed. There is no master's in alternative ed out there. And typically in a district, there's going to be one alt ed principal. There's going to be one alt ed person per district all over California. So there's 1,000 or so of them, but they rarely talk to each other, and They don't get any special training. Typically, they're the person who was good at dealing with those kids. So they wind up in this role. But as a result, it's really common for me to be working with a new alt-ed principal. I used to coach them, and now I directly supervise them. And they literally have no idea that there are ed codes specific to continuation high school. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, how would you know? You don't know if you don't know, and no one has ever told them. And so what they wind up doing is they wind up following what I call folklore. Like, there's no actual law that says a kid has to go to school 6 periods a day, but you ask 1,000 high school teachers and 995 of them will tell you that there's a law that says kids have to go to school at 6 hours a day. There's no law that says that you can't have a 19 or a 20-year-old enrolled at your high school campus. There is no law, but it exists in the folklore tradition.
I love that folklore.
And the folklore tradition rules the high school universe and the public high school universe. And often it gets really mixed up with, who are our schools designed to serve? And, they are designed to serve the entire sector who wants us to train employees. And increasingly, my lament is I don't work for the UC system. That so much folklore comes out of, well, but this is actually a UC A to G requirement or a UC entrance requirement, and therefore we have to bake it into everything. And I mean, to be clear, I love the UC system. I have spent much of my life in it, including working for the UC system. But these limitations we place on ourselves by handing down tradition that we think is required is like entirely on top of all of the tradition that it just comes from the fact that change doesn't happen without somebody pushing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm gonna borrow that phrase. I'll give you credit. But folklore is such a powerful, such a powerful phrase to describe what happens in so much of education. I feel like so much of it's like, well, this is what we have to do. This is how we do it, or this is why. And there's often not a lot of why behind it. It's usually my first question when I talk with anyone about something they want to do in a school or a program. I'm like, okay, well, why? Like, tell me why. Help me understand why this is the thing. And there's usually not a lot behind it besides, I love that folklore. Like, it's something akin to that. There's a lot of things, and parents will say that, there's lots of things that people attach to, like, this is what a school needs to be. And a lot of it is, it's not actually real. It's not actually super supportive for kids. And it's these artificial constraints that we put on ourselves in a system that already has plenty, frankly. So I don't know why we want to walk up and like give ourselves more, but that's what we seem to do. Like, let's have more ways to make this difficult and impossible and just pile those onto the list. So folklore, I love that. I love that notion and that mindset. So how do we, like, what are your thoughts? I know you've worked with comprehensive schools too, but I keep thinking about, like, okay, so at some point, things are going to return to, quote unquote normal, or we're going to be able to be back in school again. But how do we get some of this, like, how are you already thinking about, like, returning kids to something that is more what we had before COVID? And what are your thoughts around that for your population in particular? Are you going to go back the way things were, or do you want to keep them with the flexibility that you've gotten this year?
So, I mean, much like the oak tree, my answer is fractal. That, like, one of my schools, Youth Chance, we're never going back. And, it turns out that as soon as we released ourselves from the idea that it was important for kids to show up in a particular time at a particular place for 4 specific hours of the day, that, our enrollment and participation numbers have doubled.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, it's a small program, so double still takes us up to, 20. But, given that those are all kids who were basically entirely out of school and mostly justice involved, and they're holding down the job and they're coming to school remotely, like they have told us real clearly this works for them. But I mean, we have other schools for whom the attribute of relationship and the attribute of sort of a positive environment really was the game changer for them. And that they are, I think, really, really struggling the most. And partly it's because they are educators who have an incredibly well-developed toolkit on one side of their practice, and that side has been completely shut down. And that sort of one of my mantras is we don't recreate the problems of the traditional high school. Like we just don't. That if the kids were in trouble because they were wearing a hat, well, we're just not going to wear a hat. We're not going to care about a hat. It doesn't impede learning. The kids were having trouble with homework. We're just not going to do homework. Like that they got into power struggles. We're just not going to do power struggles. Like most of these things, it turns out, if you just like look at like, well, where was the problem? Is it really necessary? No, it isn't. And I mean, and I want to be really fair, like, no, it isn't if you're willing to just commit to that thing. But then you've created a school that really doesn't necessarily work for other kids. Like, you know, my teachers can do amazing things because they don't work for the UC system. And at the end of the day, like, they don't then have to turn around and say, you know, that this experience was exactly equivalent to someone else's experience. And I don't really know at the deep level how important it is that all high school students are prepared in the same way. But I do know that part of what we're able to do is by actually expressly stating, you don't have to serve certain masters so you can go serve others.
Right.
And I think that well, I've totally lost track of what we were talking about.
Coming back to school, yeah, and how are you already looking towards that?
So for some of the programs, you know, they're so anxious to get back to school, and it will help. But I think that maybe the more interesting thing to me is that we already know how to do that. Like, we know how to go back to what was, with, you know, minor modifications or tweaks or something. So the interesting questions are all in like, what have we learned in this space that we don't want to go back to? I mean, one of our big learnings, you know, when we shut down unexpectedly in March, one of our immediate learnings from that emergency remote teaching, which was very remote, you know, it was very like catch as catch can, kind of pushing out some assignments. But one of the things that we learned is that we had a few kids do more work in the first few weeks of being outside of classrooms than they had done in the entire school year up to March. And when we started looking into that, a lot of that work was submitted between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. Now, I'm not saying every kid needs a 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. time slot, but, you know, we know, like, research on the adolescent brain is really, really clear. That is a highly productive time for teenagers. They want to work at that time. It also may very well be the only time their apartment is quiet. It may be the only time they can get the Wi-Fi to themselves or the laptop to themselves. And it may just be the only time they're bored enough for this to be the thing that they want to do, or in touch enough with their own, you know, goals. But that was real. And like, once you know that about a kid, you can never unknow it. You know, that kid never, ever needs to be or is never going to thrive if you ask them to thrive at 8 a.m.
Right.
I mean, they'll become an adult. Their physiology, they will change. They will grow out of this. And this is another one of these things that, like, don't get me started on people feeling like they need to suffer now so that they can suffer later.
Right.
That like they're going to become adults. It's okay. They can learn how to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning or 6:30 in the morning or whatever.
Right. They can learn how to do it. That's helpful. So, yeah, we're almost at our time, and it's just, you've given me so much to think about, because, I think the big takeaway I'm taking from talking with you is, number one, there's so many different, I think for a lot of folks that don't understand alternative schools, I'm hoping they're walking away with a better understanding. And I know I am, even though I was already kind of a pre-fan, but that, there are mindsets and approaches to instruction that can be really different. And if we can, I love even just your last example of, like, well, let's look at the data. Kids are doing their work, from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning. So let's find some ways to work with that. So rather than, again, trying to force, everyone to fit into the same mold, I just love that alternative schools can meet kids where they're at and mold around them in a way that lets them then be successful, because that's what some of us need to be able to make it through this period of our lives and get through school. So it's just an exciting and really heartwarming for me. The way of thinking about educating kids is meeting them where they are, and that this moment has been one that's allowed you to expand upon that, at least for this year, so that your kids can keep thriving. So,
and we're going to keep it going. So
yeah, I love that. Alysse, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so great and so interesting. And I'm so appreciative of your time, because I imagine you're an incredibly busy person. So thanks for joining us.
The pleasure was all mine. Always jazzed to get to talk about the crazy little marginal space of the educational universe that we live in.
Yeah, it's awesome. I have a feeling you're going to have some more teachers. I'm going to think about the fact that we don't actually train educators to work in alternative spaces. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. So, but I have a feeling you've won over some fans today that maybe will join you in that universe. So thank you for that.
Maybe they can help me design the master's program that needs to exist in the world.
There you go. I think so. Thanks.
Thanks.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator.